When my son left, restaurant security guard said to me, "I saw him pour something into your juice before the story unfolds. Hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to join our storytelling family. My name's Henry Caldwell, and if you've got the patience, I'll tell you a story that's been sitting heavy in my chest for a few years now. It's not one of those grand, world-shaking tales. Just the kind of thing that happens to a man when he's old enough to start counting his yesterdays instead of his tomorrows. I'm 76, which means I've outlived most of my bad habits and just enough of my friends to know I'm on borrowed time. I live in a little town in northern Indiana, the kind where the diner still closes at 2 and everyone still waves at you whether they know you or not. My porch faces west, so every evening I get a front row seat to the sunset melting over the cornfields. That's usually when I pour myself a glass of iced tea, sit down in that old creaky chair of mine, and let the quiet roll in. It's funny, the older you get, the more you start noticing silence. Not the empty kind, but the kind that feels full of things you didn't say when you should have. That's what this story is about, I suppose. The things said, the things unsaid, and the things you never thought you'd have to hear. It starts with my son Daniel now. Daniel was always a good boy, at least when he was little. Polite, soft-spoken, loved taking things apart just to see how they worked. His mother, my late wife Maggie, used to say he had quiet hands, meaning he could fix a watch without leaving a fingerprint on it. But as the years went on, he started drifting, the way sons do when their fathers are more stubborn than wise. We had a falling out, like so many fathers and sons before us, over something that, looking back, probably didn't matter as much as our pride said it did. He'd quit college to start his own business, some online thing I didn't understand. I told him it was a waste of time, that he should get a real job, something steady. He said I was living in the past. We both said some things we shouldn't have. Then one day he packed up, moved to Chicago, and that was that. We didn't talk for nearly 5 years after that. 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases. I'd get updates through the grapevine, a mutual friend here, a Facebook post there, but he never called, and I never tried too hard to reach out. Pride again, that old poison. Then, out of nowhere, he called me last spring. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice calm but careful, like a man walking across a frozen pond. "I was thinking maybe I could come down next weekend, just to talk." I'll be honest, my first thought wasn't joy. It was worry. When a son who hasn't spoken to you in half a decade suddenly wants to visit, it usually means something's wrong. But I said yes, of course. You don't turn down peace when it knocks, even if it's 5 years late. He drove down that Saturday afternoon, gray clouds over the horizon and rain on its way. He looked older than I remembered, thinner in the face, dark circles under his eyes. We hugged awkwardly in the driveway, the kind of hug you give a stranger you're trying to remember how to love. We decided to go out to eat. There's this family restaurant in town called the Rusty Fork. Been there since the 70s. Same carpet, same sticky menus, same waitress named Pam who calls everyone sweetheart. It's where people go when they're trying to remember how to be family again. We sat at a corner booth. The conversation started light. Weather, work, the usual safe topics. I could tell he was building up to something, though. He'd take a sip of water, glance at me like he was waiting for the right line in a play. I didn't push him. Sometimes silence does the talking for you. About halfway through my meatloaf, he said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." He looked nervous, hands fidgeting with the straw wrapper, eyes not meeting mine. Before he could go on, our drinks arrived. I'd ordered a cranberry juice, same as always. He'd gotten a beer. He smiled, said he remembered how I always used to order cranberry juice like some old detective in a hospital. We laughed. Not a big laugh, but a good one. The kind that feels like it's opening a locked door. We talked for another 20 minutes. Whatever he was trying to tell me, he never quite got to it. He said work was stressful, he'd made some bad decisions, but that he was trying to set things right. I told him that's all any man can do. Then, just as we were getting ready to leave, he said he had to take a phone call outside. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the rain. I sat there for a minute, finishing my juice, thinking maybe this was the start of something good again. That's when the security guard came up to me. Young guy, probably early 30s, buzz cut, one of those people who takes their job seriously but still tries to smile. He leaned down and said quietly, "Sir, I don't mean to alarm you, but I saw your son pour something into your juice." I remember staring at him, the words not quite sinking in. My hand froze on the glass. The room got quiet, like even the air didn't know what to do next. That's how it began, the strangest, hardest week of my life. Now, if you've ever had someone say something that doesn't make sense right away, something so strange your mind refuses to process it, you'll know what that moment felt like. The young man's words just sort of hung there in the air like fog. "I saw your son pour something into your juice." My brain tried to put it somewhere reasonable. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe Daniel was stirring sugar into it or dropping in a piece of ice. But deep down, I felt something shift, something small but undeniable, like the crack that appears in a sheet of winter ice before it gives way. I set the glass down slow, not taking another sip, and looked up at the guard. "Are you sure?" I asked. My voice came out lower than I expected. He nodded. "Pretty sure, sir. I was walking by the front cameras. They looped through the monitors in the back. Saw him take something out of his pocket, pour it into your drink, and stir it with the straw. Thought it looked weird, so I came to check." Now, I'm not the kind of man to jump to conclusions. I spent 35 years as a mechanic, and if that taught me anything, it's that every problem's got about 3 possible causes before you find the real one. But this, my own son, maybe doing something to my drink, that was a problem I didn't even know how to name. The guard must have seen the confusion in my face because he said, "Look, sir, I could be wrong. You want me to go check the footage again?" I just nodded. My throat felt dry, like all the air in the room had turned to sawdust. He walked off toward the back, and I sat there, hands folded on the table, staring at that glass of cranberry juice like it was something alive. The condensation ran down the sides in thin lines, pooling around the bottom. I'd already had a few sips. My stomach tightened. I started counting how long ago that was. 2 minutes? 3? Maybe 10. You'd be surprised how long 10 seconds can feel when you're wondering if you just swallowed something that wasn't meant for you. When Daniel came back inside, I tried to act normal. He looked calm, almost relieved, like whatever phone call he'd taken had gone his way. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just work stuff. Sorry about that." I studied his face. It was open, easy, no hint of guilt or nerves. If anything, he looked tired, maybe even sad. "You all right, Dad?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Just thinking." We paid the bill, or rather he insisted on paying, and walked out into the drizzle. I didn't mention what the guard had said. Not yet. I told myself I'd wait to see the footage first, make sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding. I didn't want to accuse my son of something so ugly without being certain. At my age, you learn that some words once said can't ever be unsaid. We stood in the parking lot for a moment, rain misting against our jackets. He said he'd be heading back to Chicago in the morning. I told him he could stay the night if he wanted. The guest room hadn't seen much use since his mother passed, and to my surprise, he agreed. The drive home was quiet. The windshield wipers made that soft, rhythmic squeak that always made Maggie hum along. Funny what sticks with you. When we got back, I made coffee. He said he was tired and went straight to bed. I stayed up for a while, watching the rain from the kitchen window, my reflection faint in the glass. I thought about the guard's words again, turning them over and over like a stone in my pocket. What would make a son, do something like that? By the time I went to bed, I'd almost convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd dropped in some vitamin powder or something. He'd always been into those health supplements. I slept, but it wasn't deep sleep, more like drifting between dark and dawn, the way you do when your mind won't leave something alone. The next morning, Daniel was already up. He'd made breakfast, eggs, bacon, even toast cut diagonally the way Maggie used to. That detail stopped me for a second, he remembered. We sat down at the table. He asked about the neighbors, the house, whether I'd thought about selling. I told him I'd die here before I sold it. That earned a small smile from him. Then he said, "Dad, I'm sorry." Just like that, no build-up, no warning. The words landed between us like a dropped plate. For what? I asked carefully. For all of it, he said. For leaving like I did. For not calling. For being a lousy son. Now, you'd think a man would be glad to hear that, to get an apology after years of silence. But there was something in the way he said it. Not relief, not peace. More like finality. Like he was closing a door, not opening one. I told him there was nothing to forgive, that fathers and sons fight, that time fixes what pride ruins, but he just nodded, eyes far away. After breakfast, he said he needed to get on the road. I walked him to the driveway. He hugged me tight, tighter than usual, and for a moment I felt something wet hit my shoulder. I thought it was the last of the drizzle, but when he pulled back, I saw his eyes were red. "Take care of yourself, Dad," he said. "You too, son," I answered, and then he drove away. I stood there for a long time after the taillights disappeared down the road. Something about the way he'd said goodbye didn't sit right. It had weight to it, like he was saying farewell to more than just the weekend. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table staring at his half-empty coffee mug. Then the nausea hit. It started slow, a sourness in my stomach, a heaviness behind the eyes. I thought maybe it was just nerves, or maybe the meatloaf from the night before. But within an hour I was sweating, my hands shaking so bad I dropped my mug. I drove myself to the clinic, stubborn old fool that I am. They took one look at me and hooked me up to an IV. The doctor said it looked like mild poisoning, nothing fatal, thank God, but enough to make them keep me overnight. He asked what I'd eaten. I told him everything. Then he asked if I might have had anything to drink that tasted unusual. That's when I remembered the guard. When I was discharged the next afternoon, I went straight to the Rusty Fork. The same young security guard was on shift. He looked surprised to see me. "Sir, you all right?" he asked. "I need to see that footage," I said. He hesitated, said he'd have to ask the manager, but after a bit of talking, and me mentioning that the hospital had used the word poisoning, he let me into the back room. There was a small monitor looping through grainy black and white camera feeds. He rewound the tape to the time we'd been there, and there it was, clear as day. Daniel sitting across from me, waiting until I turned to reach for the napkins. He pulled a small packet from his pocket. Looked like one of those single-serve sugar packs, only darker. He tore it open, poured it into my glass, and stirred. Then he sat back, expression blank. The guard glanced at me, unsure what to say. I just stared at the screen. My son, my boy. The strange thing was, he didn't look sneaky. He didn't even look angry. He looked resigned, like someone doing something he'd already decided couldn't be undone. I asked the guard for a copy of the footage. He said they couldn't give it to me without a police request, but I could have the timestamp. So I wrote it down. Then I went home and sat in my truck for what felt like hours, watching the rain streak down the windshield again, same as the day before. There are moments in life where everything you believe about family, about trust, about love, shifts just a few degrees, and you know things won't ever line up the same again. That was one of those moments. I didn't go to the police right away. I didn't even tell anyone. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was love. The line between those two gets blurry with family. Instead, I called Daniel. He didn't pick up. I left a message. Told him I'd seen the footage, that I wasn't angry, just confused. I asked him to call me back to explain. He didn't call that day or the next. On the third day, I got a knock at my door. It was a police officer from Chicago, said he was looking for next of kin. Daniel had been found in his apartment, gone by his own hand. They said there was a note. I remember sitting down slowly, like my knees had forgotten how to hold me. The words came through the air but didn't land right away. He was gone, my son. The same boy who used to climb trees higher than I dared, who once cried because he thought he'd broken his mother's garden gnome, who'd grown into a man I'd let slip away because I thought being right mattered more than being close. They gave me his belongings later that week. A box, simple as a shoe carton. Inside were his wallet, his watch, a few papers, and the note. It was written in his handwriting, shaky but his. I read it more times than I can count. It said, "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. What I put in your drink wasn't poison. It was medicine. Something to help your heart. I didn't think you'd take it if I told you what it was. I just wanted to help before it was too late. I've made mistakes, bad ones. I can't fix them, but I wanted to fix something before I go. Please forgive me. I love you. Daniel. I read that last line until the paper felt thin as air. Medicine, not poison. I'd gone to the hospital for medicine. My son had slipped into my drink, trying to help me the only way he knew how. And all the while he was fighting battles I never saw, carrying guilt I never asked about. That realization, it broke something open in me. Not in a loud way, just quiet, like a door I didn't know existed had been unlocked somewhere deep inside. I sat on that porch for nights afterward, staring at the fields, thinking about all the words we'd never said, the way love can get tangled up in pride until both start to suffocate. It's a strange thing, forgiveness. You think it's something you give, but sometimes it's something you live through. I forgave him, not because I understood, but because I loved him, and I started trying to forgive myself too. That took longer. A week later, a small padded envelope came in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a USB drive. When I plugged it into my computer, there was one video file. He'd recorded it a few days before he came to see me. He was sitting in that same Chicago apartment, the blinds half closed, sunlight cutting lines across his face. He looked thin, tired, but calm. "Hey, Dad," he said, smiling just a little. "If you're seeing this, I guess I didn't get to say everything I wanted to in person." He went on to talk about his business failing, debts he couldn't pay, people he'd borrowed from who weren't kind about being owed. He said he didn't want to bring that trouble to my doorstep. Said he knew about my heart issues, how I'd been skipping the doctor visits. He'd found out through one of my old friends, apparently. The medicine he'd poured into my drink was some experimental supplement he'd been testing with a friend in pharmaceuticals. "It's safe," he said, "just something I hoped might help." He paused then, eyes lowering. "I know you probably thought the worst, and maybe I deserved that, but I just wanted you to know I never stopped being your son." He looked into the camera for a long moment, then said quietly, "I love you, Dad." The video ended. I sat there in the glow of the screen for a long time after that, my reflection faint on the black glass. Outside, the sunset painted the sky the same color as cranberry juice. And that was when I finally cried. Not just for him, but for everything between us. All the years wasted on silence. All the words that could have changed the shape of our days if only we'd said them sooner. It's been 3 years now. The house is quieter than it's ever been, but it's not empty. His memory sits with me on the porch sometimes. I'll pour 2 glasses of tea, one for me, one for him. Sometimes, when the light hits just right, I swear I can see him sitting there, head tilted back, laughing that easy laugh he had when he was a boy. Funny thing about life, it doesn't always give you the answers you want, but it gives you time to make peace with the ones you get. And every now and then, when I sip my drink and taste that faint tartness of cranberry, I think about that night at the Rusty Fork and I whisper, "I forgive you, son. I understand now." But that's not quite the end of the story, because something happened a few weeks after that made me realize maybe Daniel wasn't done talking to me after all. It's strange, the way time keeps moving even when you feel like you've stepped out of it. After Daniel passed, I remember days that felt like the same gray loop. Coffee, porch, silence, bed, then coffee, porch, silence, bed again. Like the world had lost its color but forgot to stop spinning. The neighbors tried to help in their own ways. Mrs. Fletcher next door brought casseroles every other day for a month. The pastor stopped by once, said something about God's mysterious ways, which didn't help much. I thanked them all, of course, because grief teaches you manners even when it burns your patience down to ashes. Mostly, though, I just sat with it. Grief, guilt, confusion, whatever you want to call that heavy thing that moves in when you lose someone you love and can't make sense of how it happened. Daniel's thing stayed in that box by my recliner for weeks. I'd open it sometimes, pick up his watch, turn it over in my hand, still worked. I wound it every morning out of habit. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I couldn't wear it either. It felt like borrowing time that wasn't mine. Then one morning I decided I needed to do something. Anything. Sitting still was starting to feel like rust spreading through me. So I drove to Chicago. It's only a couple hours' drive, but I hadn't been there in years, not since Maggie was alive. The city felt louder, meaner than I remembered. Horns, construction, people moving fast like they were late to something they couldn't name. Daniel's apartment was on the south side, a block of older brick buildings that had seen better decades. The landlord, a tired-looking man in a windbreaker, met me out front. He recognized me right away. "You must be Mr. Caldwell," he said quietly, shaking my hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." He let me inside. The apartment was small but tidy, cleaner than I'd expected. A couch, a desk, a coffee table covered in papers, the smell of dust and something faintly sweet like old cologne. I walked around slow, touching things like they might crumble if I wasn't careful. There were pictures on the wall, most of them of Daniel with friends, a few from when he was younger. But there was one I didn't remember ever seeing before. It was me and him at the lake, maybe 20 years back. I was teaching him to fish. He'd been 10 or 11, grinning like he'd just discovered the world. I stood there staring at that photo for a long while. I didn't even remember who took it. Probably Maggie. But the thing that hit me hardest was that he'd kept it framed, hanging on his wall. Through all those years apart, that picture had been there, watching over him. Made me realize sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just hides where you aren't looking. The landlord told me I could take whatever I wanted, that the rest would go into storage after 30 days. I gathered up a few things. The picture, some notebooks, his laptop, and an old leather jacket I'd given him years ago. It still smelled faintly like him, that mix of soap and gasoline and coffee that every man seems to carry in his own way. When I was about to leave, the landlord said, "There's one more thing. He left this for you." He handed me a small envelope. My name was written on it in Daniel's handwriting, steady this time, not like the shaky note from before. I held it for a second, feeling that familiar lump rise in my throat, then slipped it into my jacket pocket. I wanted to open it at home, where it was quiet. I drove back that afternoon, the sky heavy with rain again. Seems like every big thing in my life happens under gray clouds. By the time I got home, it was almost dark. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down on the porch, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. The note said, "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back to fix things in person. There's a storage unit on Route 9 under my name. Use this key. You'll find some things there I couldn't bring myself to face. Maybe you'll know what to do with them. Thank you for everything, even the things I didn't understand until it was too late. Love, Daniel." I turned the key over in my hand. Plain, silver, nothing special. But I knew then that I couldn't just sit here and wonder. The next morning, I drove out to Route 9. The place was one of those self-storage lots on the edge of town, long rows of metal doors, gravel drive, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt. The manager, a big man with a baseball cap, looked up Daniel's name and pointed me to Unit 37. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and lifted the door. Inside were stacks of boxes, some labeled, most not, a folding table, a chair, and against the back wall, a safe. I started with the boxes, old receipts, business documents, prototypes for some kind of product I couldn't identify. Looked like pieces of electronics, little circuit boards, wires, some handwritten schematics. I recognized his handwriting, those neat block letters he'd had since high school. He'd always been meticulous like that. Then I found a box full of letters, all addressed to me, none mailed. Some were long, some short, all of them dated stretching back nearly 4 years. I read them sitting right there on the concrete floor, my back against the wall, the smell of dust thick in the air. "Dad, today I got another investor rejection. You were right about needing something steady. I wish I'd listened, Dad. I met someone. Her name's Tessa. She says I should call you. Maybe I will soon. Dad, Tessa's gone. She said I'm not present enough. Maybe she's right. I can't stop thinking about what I owe people, what I owe you. Dad, happy birthday." I almost called tonight, but I didn't know what I'd say, so I'm writing instead. There were dozens of them, all unsent, all written like he was speaking to me across some invisible line he couldn't quite cross. That was the moment it really hit me. How much distance pride can build between two people who love each other. It's like a wall built one small brick at a time until one day you realize you can't even see the other side anymore. When I finally reached the safe, I sat there staring at it. It had a dial, no keypad, no hint of a combination. I tried his birthday, mine, Maggie's. Nothing. Then, remembering how he thought, I tried the date of that photo, the one at the lake, July 14, 1999. The dial clicked. Inside were a few things, an old camera, a thick envelope of cash, and a stack of photographs. Most were of his mother and me, scanned copies of old family albums. But one photo stood out. It was recent, taken maybe a year before he died. It showed him standing in front of some kind of workshop next to another man. They both looked proud, holding what looked like a small device the size of a phone battery. Written on the back in marker were the words, Prototype Number 3, Heartwave. I didn't know what that meant, but something about the name caught my attention. Heartwave. It sounded medical. Maybe the supplement he'd mentioned in that video wasn't some shady experiment after all. Maybe it was something he was really working on. I took the photo home and called the number printed on the side of one of the boxes. Heartwave Technologies. To my surprise, someone answered. The man on the other end was cautious at first, but when I said my name, his tone softened. "You're Daniel's father," he said. I was his partner. He introduced himself as Eric. He told me they'd been developing a wearable cardiac monitor, a small sensor patch that could track early signs of heart failure and send data to a phone app. The supplement Daniel had mentioned wasn't just something he'd made up. It was part of their study. He'd been testing formulas that could help stabilize arrhythmias. He was brilliant, Eric said quietly. But he pushed himself too hard. The investors pulled out, and he took it personally. I didn't see how bad it had gotten. I sat there listening, trying to take it all in. My son hadn't just been floundering. He'd been trying to build something that could save lives, maybe even mine. Eric said he'd kept some of Daniel's work going quietly, using what little funding he could scrape together. If it ever sees the light of day, he said, it'll be because of him. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about how small I'd made Daniel's dreams seem when he first told me about them. A real job, I'd said back then, as if what he wanted to do wasn't real enough. Maybe I'd been too afraid of things I didn't understand. That night, I opened his laptop. It took me a while to guess the password. Turns out it was Caldwell 1999. Same as the lake date. Inside were folders full of research files, designs, and emails. But one folder was named Dad. It had only one video in it. He looked healthier in this one, maybe filmed months before the end. The camera was propped on a desk. He smiled, that same half grin he used to flash when he was trying to downplay something serious. "Hey, old man," he said, "if you ever see this, it means you've probably gone snooping through my computer. Can't blame you. Guess it runs in the family." He laughed softly, then grew serious. "I know we didn't see eye to eye on a lot, but I want you to know something. I never blamed you. You taught me to build things that last. Maybe I took that too literally. I kept trying to build something to last forever. Turns out nothing does. But love's pretty close." He paused, staring down for a second, then looked back up. "I'm trying to make something that'll help people live longer, Dad. Maybe you too. I know your heart's been acting up. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll go see a doctor. Don't be stubborn." He smiled again, softer this time. "And don't forget to fix the fence by the oak tree. It's leaning." Then the video ended. I sat back, eyes wet, half laughing, half crying. The damn fence was leaning. There's a quiet kind of grace in realizing the person you thought you needed to teach was trying to teach you something all along. Daniel wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to reach me in his own way, even after he was gone. The next week, I went to see a cardiologist. First time in years. Turns out Daniel had been right. I was in worse shape than I thought. They started me on treatment, changed my meds, and the doctor told me straight, "If you'd waited another year, Mr. Caldwell, you might not be here." Funny how life loops back like that. My son, who I thought tried to poison me, might have actually saved me. Twice. After that, I started fixing things around the house. The fence, the shed, even the porch steps. It wasn't about keeping busy. It was about mending what could still be mended. One afternoon while I was cleaning out the garage, I found one of Daniel's old toolboxes from when he was a kid. Inside, tucked under the screwdrivers and bolts, was a folded piece of paper, a drawing, crude, done in crayon, 2 stick figures holding fishing poles, above them in messy handwriting, me and Dad. I sat on the floor of that garage, holding that drawing, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful, because for all the things we missed, we'd still had that love, messy and unspoken, but real as anything. It's funny. Forgiveness doesn't come all at once. It comes like spring thaw, slow, uneven, but steady, and the world starts to look alive again. I keep Daniel's photo on the mantel now, right beside Maggie's. Sometimes when the sun sets just right through the porch windows, it catches both their faces in that soft gold light, and I can almost hear them laughing together. But about a month after that trip to the storage unit, something unexpected happened. Something that made me believe, maybe, my son wasn't quite finished with his story after all. The day it happened started out like any other. Quiet, with the smell of coffee filling the kitchen and the morning light cutting thin stripes across the table. I was halfway through the paper, pretending to care about the weather forecast, when I heard the mail truck stop outside. The driver always left the mail wedged halfway into the box like he was in a hurry. I walked out to get it more for the stretch than the letters. Most days it was bills, church flyers, and junk. But that morning, there was a small padded envelope with no return address. Again. The last time that happened, it had been from Daniel. My first thought was that it couldn't be. But my hands started shaking just the same. I stood there on the porch for a minute, the wood creaking under my weight, staring at the envelope. The world had gone still. No cars, no birds, just the whisper of the wind through the cornfield behind the house. It's funny how a simple piece of mail can suddenly feel heavier than it should. I took it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it while my coffee went cold. Finally, I tore it open. Inside was a flash drive. Nothing else. No note, no name. Just a small silver stick, the kind you buy at any gas station. I hesitated for a while before plugging it into my laptop. Part of me was afraid of what I might find, or maybe afraid of what I wouldn't. When I finally did, a folder popped up, Heartwave Archive. There were documents, blueprints, data logs, but what caught my eye was a single video file titled, "For Dad, Final." My stomach tightened. My hands hovered over the mouse. It felt like opening a door to a room I'd already said goodbye to, but hadn't locked yet. I clicked play. The video was dimly lit, just Daniel again in his apartment. Same couch, same blinds letting in those thin stripes of light. He looked tired but not sick, not like someone planning to leave the world. There was a strange calm in his face. He smiled when he looked at the camera, and for a second I almost smiled back. "Hey, Dad," he said softly. "If you're watching this, I guess I didn't get to finish the last one." He ran a hand through his hair, then sighed. "There's something I need to explain, about that night at the Rusty Fork, about the drink." I leaned closer without realizing it. "I wasn't honest with you," he continued. "The medicine, it wasn't something I'd made. It was something I'd stolen." He let the words hang there. My chest went tight. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. We'd been testing a batch of compounds that were supposed to help with arrhythmias. But there was one version, a formula that hadn't cleared approval yet. My partner said it was too risky, too unstable. I took it anyway. I thought I could make it work. I thought maybe if it helped you, it would prove something. To him, to the investors, to myself. But it was wrong of me. He looked down at his hands. "It wasn't poison, Dad, but it wasn't safe either. I'd convinced myself it was fine because I couldn't handle another failure. I didn't want to lose one more thing I loved." He swallowed hard, eyes glassy. "When you got sick the next day, I realized what I'd done. I tried to fix it. I called the hospital that night anonymously to check if anyone came in with symptoms. When they said your name, I knew." He wiped his eyes, laughing once. That broken kind of laugh that sounds more like a cough. "I never meant to hurt you, Dad. I just wanted to be the kind of son you could be proud of." He looked into the camera again, and it felt like he was looking right through me. "I'm sorry." The video ended there. Just black screen. No goodbye this time. I sat back, heart pounding slow and heavy. I didn't know whether to be angry or heartbroken. Maybe both. The truth was messier than I'd imagined. Not poison, not medicine, but something in between. A mistake born from love and desperation. I sat there for a long while, listening to the old wall clock ticking away behind me. It sounded louder than usual. Then I noticed something else in the folder, another file, smaller, titled Blueprint D. When I opened it, it wasn't data. It was a drawing. A schematic for a small handheld device with the words Heartwave D dedication model written across the top. Below in Daniel's handwriting it said, "To Dad." The first to believe, even when he didn't know he was. That line undid me. I closed the laptop and just sat there, elbows on the table, my head in my hands. The tears didn't come right away. They never do, not at my age. But when they did, they came quiet and steady, the kind you don't fight. That night I dreamed about him. I was back at the lake, only this time I was the one holding the fishing pole wrong, and Daniel was laughing, showing me how to fix it. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, but not from sadness. It felt like he'd really been there. The next morning I called Eric, his old business partner, told him about the flash drive. He sounded surprised. "I thought everything had been lost," he said. "You should come by. There's something I think you should see." So I did. His office was in an industrial park outside Chicago, small but clean. On the wall behind his desk hung a whiteboard covered in notes, formulas, and diagrams. And sitting on the desk was a small device about the size of a deck of cards, silver with a single green light blinking softly. "That's Heartwave," he said, picking it up gently. "Daniel's design, the one we're still trying to get FDA approval for." I held it carefully, the way you'd hold something sacred. "And it works?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Better than we ever expected. His research, what he left behind, helped us fix the early issues. We've tested it on several patients now. It's saved 3 lives already." He paused, then added quietly, "We're naming the production model after him, the Caldwell device." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at that little silver box blinking in my palm. It felt like holding a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. I asked Eric if Daniel's name would be included in the patents. He said yes. In fact, the first prototype that worked had Daniel's initials etched into the circuit board. "He was brilliant," Eric said again. "Troubled, but brilliant. You should be proud." And I was. More than I could say. When I drove home that afternoon, the clouds broke for the first time in days. The sunlight came through in streaks, warm and gold like the sky was opening up. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face, and for the first time since that night in the restaurant, I felt something close to peace. Still, peace isn't the same as closure. About a week later, I got another call, this time from the hospital. Not about me, but about a patient. A woman in her 30s had been admitted after a heart episode. They said she'd been wearing one of the prototype Heartwave monitors, the Caldwell model. It had alerted doctors early and saved her life. The doctor who called said she wanted to meet me, said she had something to give me. Her name was Tessa. Yes, that Tessa. The woman Daniel had written about in one of those letters. I met her 2 days later at the hospital cafeteria. She was kind-eyed, calm, with a faint scar on her chest from where they'd inserted the monitor. She smiled when she saw me, and for a second it felt like she recognized me before I'd even sat down. "You look just like him," she said softly. "Same eyes." She told me she and Daniel had stayed in touch, even after they split, that he'd sent her one of the early Heartwave prototypes just in case, because she had a heart condition she didn't talk about much. "He said it might save me one day," she said, and it did. Then she pulled something from her bag, a small black notebook, edges worn. "He left this with me," she said. "Told me to give it to you if anything ever happened." I took it carefully, the leather soft and cracked under my fingers. His handwriting was inside, of course, neat, careful, but more personal than any of the letters I'd found. It wasn't filled with formulas or plans. It was reflections, thoughts. On the first page it said, "If I can't build a bridge in this life, maybe I can leave pieces of one behind." The rest were dated entries, things he'd written over the months before he passed. Notes about guilt, yes, but also about hope. He'd written about me, about Maggie, about the way he'd kept that lake photo above his desk to remind him what real peace looked like. One line stuck with me more than any other. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting the hurt. Maybe it's about remembering the love louder. I must have read that line 100 times. Before I left the hospital, Tessa said something that stayed with me. She said, "He talked about you a lot, Henry. He was scared you'd never forgive him, but he never stopped trying to make you proud." When I drove home that night, I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the road and thought about my son, the one I hadn't understood until it was too late. But even in death, he'd found ways to reach me, to finish the conversation we'd left halfway through. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the absence of loss, but the persistence of connection. The echo that never stops. The next few months went by quietly. The company got their approval. HeartWave, or the Caldwell device, made the local news. They even asked if I'd do a short interview. I didn't want to at first. I'm not a man who likes cameras. But then I thought about Daniel, how he'd always said I was too private, too stubborn to share anything real. So I did it. They filmed me on my porch of all places during sunset. I told them the truth, not the whole story, but enough. That my son had dedicated his life to something that would save others. That he'd been kind, flawed, and brilliant. That he'd taught me the hardest lesson a man can learn. That love and understanding aren't the same thing, but they need each other to survive. The reporter asked me one last question before she packed up. If you could say one thing to him now, what would it be? I looked past the camera, toward the horizon, where the light was fading into that deep gold I'd come to love. I said I'd tell him he did good, and that I'm proud. That night I sat on the porch again, 2 glasses of iced tea on the table, one for me, one for him. The air was warm, crickets starting their evening song. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt shared. I raised my glass toward the empty chair beside me and said, "Here's to you, son." And in that moment, I swear I felt the breeze move just enough to rattle the ice in the other glass. Like someone was answering back. But the story doesn't end there, because something else happened a few weeks later that changed how I thought about everything. Not just Daniel, but life itself. The summer after the HeartWave launch turned out warmer than any I can remember. The kind of heat that sticks to your shirt and hums in the air like an old ceiling fan that's lost a screw. Every morning I'd sit on the porch with my glass of water and watch the road shimmer in the distance, thinking about how strange it felt to still be here, alive, breathing, waiting, when my son was not. They put his name on the device box, like Eric said they would. Caldwell model, in honor of Daniel H. Caldwell. I kept one on the mantel next to Maggie's old photo. It blinked every few seconds, a soft green pulse like a tiny heartbeat that never needed rest. Some nights I'd sit and watch it until the light blurred in my eyes. Funny thing how something so small could hold so much weight. People in town started hearing the story after the news interview. Folks I hadn't spoken to in years dropped by with pies or casseroles like grief needed feeding. Pastor Jim came over one afternoon with a kind smile, and that careful tone preachers use when they're not sure if you're angry with God or just tired. He said, "Henry, you know, sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. Sometimes it's about you being able to keep living." I nodded like I understood. Truth was, I didn't, not yet. Forgiveness still felt like a word other people use too easily. Then one Tuesday morning I got a letter, a real letter this time, not an email or text. The envelope was from a law office in St. Louis. I figured it was junk or some leftover paperwork from Daniel's estate, but when I opened it, the first line froze me. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, we are writing to inform you that a woman named Miss Tessa Hart has left an item in our safekeeping to be delivered to you in the event of her passing." My heart sank. I'd just seen her 2 months earlier, healthy, smiling, full of life. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, and the receptionist confirmed it. Tessa had suffered a sudden heart attack the week before. They'd done everything they could. Even the HeartWave device had sent an alert, but it was too late. They said she'd gone quickly, peacefully, but I couldn't shake the ache that crawled up my chest. It felt like losing a piece of Daniel all over again. 2 days later, a small box arrived by courier. Inside was a folded letter, tied with a blue ribbon and a photograph. In the picture, Tessa was standing with Daniel in front of some lab equipment, both of them grinning wide, goggles pushed up on their foreheads. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "Test run number 3. Success," and still smiling somehow. Her letter was short. "Dear Henry, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it through. Please don't be sad. I got 5 extra years because of your son's work. 5 good ones. That's more than I ever expected. There's something else, though. Daniel told me once that he never got to show you the last version of his prototype. He said it wasn't perfect, but it was his proudest one, the one he built by hand after your heart scare. I kept it safe for him just in case. Now I'm keeping my promise by sending it back where it belongs, home. With love, Tessa." Beneath the letter, wrapped in soft cloth, was a small metal device, a little rough around the edges, solder marks uneven, the casing scratched in spots. On the back was engraved, "For Dad, try number 7. I turned it over in my hands for a long time. It wasn't like the clean, polished model on the market now. This one had character, fingerprints, imperfections. It felt human. I pressed the button and a faint pulse of blue light flickered. It still worked. That night I sat outside again, the prototype in my hand, and I started talking to him. Out loud, like a fool maybe, but it felt right. "Son," I said, "you sure made a mess out of me. I used to think life was simple. You work, you raise a family, you die proud. Then you went and complicated it with all your thinking and feeling and inventing." I chuckled softly. The crickets answered back. "I miss you, boy," I said finally. "And if you can hear me, I hope you know I forgive you. For everything, and I hope you forgive me too, for all the things I never said when I should have." Then I set the little device on the table beside my glass of tea and watched the light blink through the night, steady and slow. Somewhere in that rhythm I heard his laughter again, faint but there. The next few days I couldn't stop thinking about Tessa's words. 5 good years. It stuck with me like a song that won't leave your head. 5 years because of my son. That's what legacy really is, isn't it? Not the patents, not the interviews. Just borrowed time, given quietly to someone else. I drove out to St. Louis a week later to visit her grave. She was buried on a small hill overlooking the river. Simple stone, nothing fancy. I left the photo of her and Daniel at the base along with a wildflower from the roadside. Then I sat down beside the grave and said thank you for keeping his memory alive, for being his friend when I couldn't. As I was leaving, I noticed something carved into the corner of her stone. Tiny, almost hidden, it read, "Heartwave number 001. She'd worn the first working prototype until the end. Somehow that made me smile. When I got home, I found a message on my answering machine, a rare thing these days. It was from Eric again. "Henry, I thought you should know. We're doing a dedication ceremony next month. Heartwave's officially being adopted by several hospitals nationwide. We'd like you to say a few words." Now, I hadn't spoken in public since Maggie's funeral. The idea made my throat tighten. But then I thought of Daniel, how he never got the chance to stand up and see what he'd done for people. So I said yes. The ceremony was held in a big conference hall in Chicago. Bright lights, polished floors, too much air conditioning. I felt out of place in my brown jacket, surrounded by people in suits and shiny shoes. But when they called my name and handed me the microphone, the room went quiet. I took a deep breath and looked around. There were doctors, nurses, engineers, faces young and eager, the way Daniel's had once been. "I'm not much for speeches," I started, and a few folks chuckled politely, "but I am a father. And I reckon being a father means you spend half your life teaching and the other half learning what you should have known all along." I told them about Daniel. Not the headlines or the tragedy, but the boy who used to take apart toasters just to see what made them hum, the young man who cared too much, thought too much, and believed too hard in people like me who didn't always deserve it. I said he made mistakes, sure, big ones, but every mistake he made was driven by love. And that love, that wild, stubborn kind, is why we're all here today. Then I held up the little prototype Tessa had given me, its light still blinking faintly. "This was his last version," I said. "It ain't pretty, and it ain't perfect, but it's real, just like him." I paused then, my throat tightening. He told me once he wanted to build something that would outlive him. I think he did. The room was silent for a long moment before they started clapping. Not the loud, polite kind, but that soft, steady kind that feels like understanding. Afterward, a young woman came up to me. She was maybe 25, wearing hospital scrubs under her jacket. She said, "Mr. Caldwell, I'm alive because of your son's invention." My heart wave alerted the doctors when I went into cardiac arrest last winter. They told me I had less than 5 minutes. She smiled, and it was one of those smiles that fills a whole room. So, thank you. And thank him, wherever he is. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, tears stinging my eyes, and said quietly he'd be happy to hear that. That night I stayed in a small hotel downtown, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how strange life is, how one man's regret can become another person's second chance. I went out onto the balcony. Below, the city buzzed like an open circuit board. Lights, cars, voices. Somewhere down there, a dozen green lights were blinking quietly on people's chests, tiny reminders of Daniel's work. Maybe he wasn't gone after all. When I got home the next morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch again. The air was cooler, early fall creeping in. I watched the leaves starting to turn along the fence line and thought about how everything changes whether we want it to or not. Then I noticed something strange. The little prototype, the one with try number 7 on the back, wasn't blinking anymore. The light had gone out. For a moment I panicked. Tried pressing the button, tapping it, even replacing the battery. Nothing. The thing was dead. I should have been upset, but instead I just laughed quietly to myself. "Guess you've done your part," I said. "You can rest now." I set it back on the mantel beside his picture. The silence in the house felt different after that. Not empty, but peaceful, like a song that had finally reached its last note. A few days later, I decided to take a drive out to the lake. The same one from that old photo of me and Daniel. The road was long and cracked, lined with weeds and memories. When I got there, the dock was still standing, though the boards had grayed and warped over time. I sat at the edge, feet dangling above the water, and watched the ripples spread out from where I dropped a pebble. I thought about how many moments like that we'd shared. Not big ones, just small, quiet ones that seemed ordinary at the time but turned golden in hindsight. That's when it hit me. Maybe legacy isn't about what you leave behind at all. Maybe it's about what you leave within the people who remember you. The pieces of kindness, of courage, of stubborn hope that ripple outward long after you're gone. I looked out across the lake and said, "You did it, son. You built your bridge." The wind moved across the water then, soft but sure, and for just a second I could have sworn I heard his voice, that same laugh from years ago, drifting like the echo of a good memory. When I drove home, I didn't feel old anymore. I felt full of something bigger than regret or sorrow, something that felt like forgiveness finally settling in. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. But life, I've learned, always has one more surprise waiting. And mine came about a week later, when I got a call that would open a door I didn't even know was still there. The call came early in the morning, just after sunrise. I'd been up since 5, same as always, making coffee and reading the local paper out of habit more than interest. The phone rang once, twice. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was a telemarketer, but something in the sound, a kind of hesitation between rings, made me pick it up. "Mr. Caldwell?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Rachel Turner from Heartwave Technologies. I work with Eric." Her voice was polite, professional, but there was a tremor behind it, like someone carrying news that might weigh too much for the hour. "Morning," I said, trying to sound awake. "Everything all right?" "Yes, sir. I thought you should know first. Eric passed away last night, heart failure." For a moment, I couldn't find any words. Eric had been younger than Daniel, barely 50, always running around full of plans. The irony wasn't lost on either of us when we met. The Heart Monitor Company, founded by 2 men with weak hearts. "I'm sorry to hear that," I finally said, my voice quieter than I meant. "He was a good man." "He was," she said. "And there's something else. He left instructions that if anything ever happened to him, we were to contact you. He wanted you to have something." That sentence pulled me upright. "To have something?" "Yes, sir. It's a letter and, a folder. A very old one, apparently written by your son." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I asked where I could pick it up. The office had changed since my last visit, bigger, brighter, full of framed newspaper articles about the device. I walked through the lobby feeling a little like a relic among machines. Rachel met me near the front, a young woman in her 30s with kind eyes behind square glasses. She handed me a plain envelope and a tan file folder bound with a red clip. "Eric said you'd understand," she told me. "He kept this in his safe. We didn't even know it was there until we went through his things this morning." I thanked her and left before anyone could ask questions. The drive home was long and gray, the sky low with clouds. I didn't open the envelope until I was back on my porch, coffee in hand, the sound of wind moving through the trees. The letter was short, written in Eric's familiar scrawl. "Henry, if you're reading this, it means I've gone wherever your boy is. Don't feel sad. My ticker always had a mind of its own, and I made peace with that a long time ago. There's something I never told you. Daniel didn't just design HeartWave for hospitals. He had another project, one he never patented. Said it wasn't ready for the world yet. He called it Echo. I think you deserve to see what it was. He left the blueprints with me for safekeeping. I think he meant for you to find them when you were ready. Well, I think you're ready now. Take care of yourself, Henry, and thank you for raising the man who changed everything. Eric." I opened the folder with careful fingers. Inside were hand-drawn schematics, a few pages of typed notes, and one small Polaroid photo. Daniel sitting at a workbench, smiling faintly, holding what looked like a small speaker the size of an apple. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "Echo, Prototype 1, for the ones we lose." At first, I couldn't make sense of it. I read the notes 3 times before it clicked. Echo wasn't just another heart monitor. It was something far more personal. A device that could record, store, and play back a person's heartbeat, syncing it with a message, like a keepsake, only living. The idea was that loved ones could carry the heartbeat of someone who'd passed, a living rhythm, not a recording. I sat there staring at the diagrams, feeling a kind of ache I hadn't felt in years. My son hadn't been building machines, he'd been building ways to keep people connected, even after loss. Maybe especially after loss. The last page had a handwritten note, messy but legible. "Dad, if you ever find this, it means you outlasted me, and that's the way it should be. Don't be sad. Echo isn't finished, but I think it could be something beautiful. I just didn't know how to make it last yet. Maybe one day someone will. Maybe you. P.S. The sound you hear when it starts, that first pulse, that's mine." I read that line over and over. That's mine. I wasn't sure if mine meant his design or his heartbeat, but either way, I knew what I had to do. That weekend, I drove to the workshop behind my house, a shed full of tools and sawdust that hadn't seen much use since Maggie passed. I laid out the blueprints on the old workbench, the one Daniel had helped me build when he was 14. The pages curled at the edges, yellowed a bit, but the ideas felt alive. I gathered what parts I could find: wires, a speaker, an old transistor radio, even a cracked metronome. It wasn't pretty, and I'm no engineer, but I followed the drawings as best I could. Half the time I didn't know what I was doing, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt Daniel's presence not just as memory, but as guidance. Every screw, every connection felt like a conversation with him. 3 days later, I had something, a rough imitation of the photo. Round, with a small switch on the side and a faint red light that flickered when I plugged it in. I didn't expect it to work. Honestly, I just wanted to finish what he started. But when I pressed the switch, the speaker hummed softly, then emitted a low, rhythmic pulse, steady and human. I froze. It wasn't random static. It was a heartbeat, my son's heartbeat, the same one that must have been recorded from his early tests. Slow, warm, deliberate. A sound I hadn't realized I'd missed until that moment. It filled the little workshop like a presence. I sat there with my eyes closed, just listening. It felt like he was sitting across from me again, maybe grinning, maybe watching to see if I'd catch the joke he'd hidden somewhere in the design. After a minute, the pulse faded, replaced by a faint hiss, and then his voice, from awe. I didn't tell anyone about it, not Eric's company, not the press. Some things don't belong to the world. Some things are meant to stay between a father and his son. Every night after that, I'd sit on the porch and listen to that little speaker. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and imagine Daniel sitting there beside me, same way we used to sit in silence after a long day, words unnecessary. The heartbeat filled the space between us like a conversation that never ended. Weeks passed. Autumn came, leaves turning gold and red across the yard. The world kept moving. Heartwave kept growing. The papers kept printing stories, and I kept quietly aging along with the seasons. But something had changed in me. The anger was gone, the regret too. All that was left was love, plain and steady, like that pulse from the speaker. Then one morning, while cleaning the shed, I found something else tucked in the bottom of the blueprint folder. A folded scrap of paper I hadn't noticed before. It looked like a note torn from a notebook, written in Daniel's quick, slanted handwriting. "Dad, if you ever get Echo to work, you'll find one more surprise. Look under the switch." Don't ask why. Just trust me. I laughed. Even from the grave, he was still giving me puzzles. I unscrewed the small switch plate and lifted it carefully. Inside was a memory card, the old kind, tiny and black. I took it inside, plugged it into my laptop, and waited. There was only one file on it. Echo Dad Final, Wave. I clicked play, and there it was again, his voice, clearer this time. "Hi, Dad. This is, me again. I wasn't sure you'd ever find this, but I wanted you to have one last thing. When I was little, you used to say that life's like a radio station. Sometimes the signal fades, but if you keep the dial steady, you'll catch the music again. I never forgot that." He paused. I could hear him breathing, maybe smiling. "So here's my song for you." Then came a faint strumming, guitar out of tune but tender. It took me a second to recognize it. The old folk song I used to sing to him when he couldn't sleep. "Shenandoah." His voice cracked a little as he sang, quiet, like a memory you didn't want to wake. I cried then, not the sharp kind, but the long, quiet kind that cleans something out of you. When the song ended, the file faded to silence. I just sat there, letting it echo in the corners of the house. After that day, I started to notice small things I hadn't before. The way the evening light came through the trees, the sound of the neighbor's wind chime that always seemed to ring at just the right moment. Even the taste of coffee in the morning felt sharper, realer, like the world had been turned up a notch. That's the strange thing about grief. It dulls you for so long that when joy comes back, it almost hurts. But it's a good kind of hurt, the kind that means you're still alive. One evening, I took the Echo device down to the lake. The air was crisp, the sun low. I sat at the end of the dock, turned on the heartbeat, and let it play. Each thump rippled across the water, soft and steady. Then I took a small wooden box from my jacket pocket, the one that had held Maggie's wedding ring for years, and placed the Echo inside. "I think you'd like it here," I said to him. "Nice and quiet, good place to rest." Then I let the box slip into the water. It floated for a second, catching the sunlight, then sank slowly until the ripples smoothed out and the lake was still again. I didn't feel like I was saying goodbye, more like I was finishing a circle. On the way back to the truck, I stopped and looked over my shoulder one last time. The water was calm, glowing with the last light of day. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a single blue flash under the surface, just one blink, like the Echo saying thank you. That night I slept without dreams, but the story wasn't done yet, because a month later, something happened that changed what I thought I knew about endings altogether. Winter came early that year, the kind of winter that doesn't ask permission, just rolls in one night and takes the fields, the roads, and the air all in one breath. I spent most of December inside, keeping the wood stove going and reading the old letters again, one by one. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to them like they were people in the room. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. There was a sort of hum to it now, a soft, steady hum I like to imagine was Daniel's heartbeat still echoing through the walls. I don't think I ever realized, back when I was younger, how full silence could be once you stopped fighting it. Christmas came and went with little fuss. The neighbors invited me over for dinner. The Petersons, nice folks with more kids than sense, but I stayed home. Made myself stew, poured a little whiskey, watched the snow fall outside. I didn't feel lonely exactly, just reflective. Like I'd reached the point in life where you start measuring time not by the days left, but by the moments worth remembering. It was about a week after New Year's when the surprise came. The mailman knocked instead of leaving things in the box, which he never does unless it's something that needs signing. When I opened the door, he was holding a large manila envelope, rain-speckled, with a shipping label from Heartwave Technologies. "I think this one's important," he said, handing it over. "Looks like it came straight from their headquarters." Inside was a typed letter on company letterhead and another smaller envelope tucked behind it. The letter was from Rachel, the woman who'd called me about Eric. I remembered her steady voice. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, I hope this letter finds you well. We've been working on a special project at Heartwave, inspired by your son's early Echo designs. After months of development, we're finally ready to release it to the public. We thought it was only right that you see it first. The device is called Echo Line. It combines your son's concept of recorded heartbeats with a personal message system, allowing families to preserve the rhythms and voices of their loved ones. Every new unit carries an inscription that reads, 'Inspired by the work and memory of Daniel H. Caldwell.' And Mr. Caldwell, there's something else. One of our beta testers asked to reach out to you directly. We've included her letter below with her permission. Thank you again from all of us for sharing your son with the world. Warm regards, Rachel Turner, Director of Development." My hands were shaking before I even opened the smaller envelope. It was handwritten on lined paper that looked like it had been torn from a notebook. The first line stopped me cold. "Dear Mr. Caldwell, you don't know me, but your son saved my daughter's life." I sat down, the letter trembling in my fingers. The handwriting was neat but rushed, like the writer had too much heart for the space she had. "Her name is Lily. She's 6. She was born with a rare heart defect, and for years we lived in hospitals, always afraid the next attack would be the last. Last summer, our doctor recommended a new monitor, the Caldwell Heartwave. It caught an arrhythmia we didn't even know was happening. They got her into surgery in time. She's home now. She's alive. When I told her who invented it, she asked if she could write you a note. She said, 'I want to thank the man who made my heart safe.' So here it is. With endless gratitude, Sarah and Lily Monroe." Tucked inside was a smaller sheet of paper written in thick crayon. "Thank you, Mr. Henry. My heart beeps good now. I can run and jump. Mommy says your boy made the machine. I made you a picture." There was a small drawing, a stick figure with gray hair standing next to a little girl with red pigtails, both smiling under a sun. Between them was a big green heart with beep beep written in blue letters. I didn't even realize I was crying until a drop hit the paper and smudged the ink. I must have sat there for an hour just holding that drawing. The simplicity of it, so pure, so unfiltered, went right through me. I thought about all those years I'd spent trying to fix what was broken between me and my son, and here from across the country came a little girl with a working heart, unknowingly mending mine. I wrote back that night, told Sarah that Daniel would have been honored, that Lily's note would stay framed in my living room. I didn't try to be eloquent. Sometimes plain words are the only ones that hold. When I sealed the envelope, I found myself smiling through the tears. I whispered, "You hear that, son? You did it. You're still saving people." That weekend I drove into town, picked up a cheap picture frame from the hardware store, and hung Lily's drawing on the wall above my kitchen table. Right next to it I placed Daniel's photo, the one from the lab, goggles on his head, smile half crooked. The two of them side by side, a man and a child, bound by one miracle heartbeat. It looked right. The days that followed moved slow but easy. The snow melted, the earth thawed, and I started going for walks again, down to the diner, around the lake, sometimes to the church, even when there wasn't a service. Folks in town treated me a little different after that interview months before. People I barely knew would stop and ask about Daniel, or tell me how the Heartwave had helped someone they loved. Each story was a tiny spark, and together they made something bright enough to walk by. One afternoon in late March, I was at the diner finishing my usual turkey sandwich and black coffee when a young man walked in wearing a Heartwave company jacket. He ordered to go, then glanced around like he was looking for someone. When his eyes met mine, he smiled and came over. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Henry Caldwell?" I nodded, cautious but curious. "That depends who's asking." He laughed softly. "My name's Evan. I'm one of the engineers at Heartwave. Rachel mentioned you might stop by here sometimes." We shook hands. He looked barely 30, hair a mess, nervous energy all over. I could tell he admired Daniel the way young inventors admire legends. "I just wanted to say," he began, "your son's work changed my life. I mean that. I joined the company because of him. My dad died of heart failure when I was a kid. When I learned about Heartwave, I thought maybe I could help someone else's dad live a little longer." He hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small device, sleek and silver, glowing faintly blue. "This is the first Echoline prototype off the line," he said. "We all voted to have it sent to you. I took it carefully. It was lighter than the old Echo, smooth, elegant. On the back, engraved in neat letters, were the words, 'To Henry Caldwell for teaching us what love sounds like.'" That undid me. I felt my throat close up. All I could do was nod. "Thank you," I whispered. He'd be proud of you all." Evan smiled, eyes shining. "We're proud of him. And of you, sir. Because without you, there'd be no story to tell." When he left, I sat there for a long while, just staring at the device. The blue light blinked slowly, like a heartbeat at rest. I pressed the button, half expecting Daniel's voice again, but instead there was a soft chime and a single phrase that scrolled across the tiny screen. "Love doesn't end, it echoes." I laughed through my tears. Simple, perfect. My son would have liked that. That night I placed the Echoline on the porch table next to my tea. The air was cool, early spring, carrying that scent of damp earth and new grass. The crickets hadn't quite come back yet, but the world was waking. I looked at the light blinking steady, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I felt like I was part of something still moving forward. I thought about Maggie then, her laughter, her patience. I thought about Daniel, his mistakes, his brilliance, his endless need to fix the unfixable. And I thought about Lily, a little girl somewhere out there running and laughing with a strong heart, her crayon drawing on my wall, holding the whole story together. I raised my glass of tea to the fading sun. "Here's to you, son," I said softly. "You found your way home." The sky turned that slow orange that looks like forgiveness spread thin. I leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath me, feeling time stretch and soften. The Echoline blinked once more, a gentle pulse, alive and sure, and for just a moment I could almost hear Daniel's voice again, warm and amused, like he was sitting beside me saying, "Told you I'd figure it out, Dad." I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the evening settle around me. No rush, no sorrow, just the quiet rhythm of a world still beating.